Good evening. Today I'm going to go over a short lecture that talks about the first few moves of the game and the directionality that can be imparted in the Fuseki. So Fuseki is a broad term for the global opening strategy versus some of the unique corner situations which are covered under Joseki. So here Fuseki, um, in the broadest sense, there's two categories. Now, in the first four moves, we frequently will see each player occupy two of the open corners. And the two categories are parallel Fuseki, in which the formation of black and white are parallel to one another, versus diagonal. So diagonal Fuseki will often create more intertwined groups, less large-scale frameworks, so we could say it's slightly more fighting. Although if you're a player who looks to make frameworks, it can still be done, but parallel Fuseki supports that. If you really like parallel Fuseki, you can force it, essentially, as white by playing diagonal of your opponent. Now, no matter where black plays, either in the upper left or the lower right, white will have two stones in adjacent corners. Whereas if you play in an adjacent corner to black, anywhere, then black has the option of playing a diagonal-based Fuseki. Or black has the option of playing some sort of parallel Fuseki. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the difference between 4-4 stones in Fuseki and 3-4 stones. There's much to be said about 3-5 stones, such as this, and 4-5 stones, such as this, or even 6-3, or even 6-4. But since this is aimed at double-digit Qs and lower-level single-digit Q players, I'm going to just talk about 4-4 and 3-4 stones. So the 3-4 stone is on the third line on one side, and it's on the fourth line on another side. So the top side is called its open side because there's 4 lines under the stone, whereas it's closed on the right side where there are only 3 lines. When we have that, I'm going to demonstrate here in this corner. The open approach for white is on the fourth side, line with the side with 4 lines. So we could approach here from a knight's move. There's also an approach from 1 space away. And there are other distant approaches from 2 spaces high and 2 spaces low. There's a saying in Go that your opponent's good point is your good point. So if black is looking to make an enclosure, black can make an enclosure on that at any point. In this particular Fuseki that I've set up, we see we have 3 4-4 stones. Now the 4-4 stone is symmetrical, whereas the 3-4 stone in the upper left is an asymmetrical point. So asymmetrical stones are more urgent. Asymmetrical stones are more urgent because there's only one side from which to approach. So if it's black's turn, black is normally going to enclose. Of course, there are other strategies, such as we call this the Chinese Fuseki, which I'm not going to detail here, but there are other strategies. One thing to note is the upper side is wider. It has 12 lines between the 2 stones. Whereas on the right side, between the black and the white stones, there's only 11 lines. Similarly, on the left side, there's only 11 lines between the black and the white stone. So the top side not only contains an asymmetrical point, it also is one line wider. Therefore, in a game like this, you're almost, in a classical standpoint, you're going to see some sort of enclosure. Now, of course, there are very famous opening patterns such as this, which is called the Kobayashi Fuseki, and then there's Chinese Fuseki. For now, we're going to call those special strategies that were developed in the 20th century. And so I'm just talking for the double-digit Q and the single-digit Q about basic principles of the Fuseki. So I'm not going to highlight other strategies that intentionally go against that. Okay. Now, in this position, we have 13 lines on the top side, 12 lines on the left side, and 11 lines on the bottom and on the right. So the top side is the widest. Also, black's topside stone is open on the top, and white's topside stone is open on the top. So both are considered open to each other. The approach for black is supported by his own stone. And similarly, if black were, say, to just merely enclose the bottom left, white would get the jump on the top side and get to approach with the support of his own R16 stone while playing on the widest side, while also denying black a corner enclosure. So we could say that black, having to choose between the lower left stone and the upper left stone, the upper left is more important. Speaking purely about the 3/4 stone, it has an enclosure that wants to be made around A or B, C or D. All of these are valid enclosures. And after making the enclosure, it has a primary direction towards the side that faces the enclosure on its tall direction, and then a secondary side on the upper. Let me detail what I mean. When black makes this move, we almost imagine that it's a wall. And if it were a wall, the side here, if I put two stones, makes a strong box. Whereas the side here makes what we could call a tray. So this is a tray shape, and that's a boxy shape. You see the box is deeper. Therefore, going back to what actually would happen, let's let's say that it would be more usual to play in the area around 1 rather than to play in the area around 2, because it's in the direction of the black enclosure. Furthermore, the top side is one line more narrow than the left side, although the top side does limit white's formation. So in either case, the top or the left is good, but the left is considered the primary direction of the enclosure in the upper left. Now, one thing I want to particularly address that you see in a lot of double-digit Q games is a player will first play here. Let's see. And you'll see black play in this direction first, hoping that, say, if white makes his corner enclosure, he's denied white of his primary direction after the enclosure. And then black can go ahead and make his enclosure, and he has a stone in the primary direction. However, when we do this in the wrong order, we must enclose the corner first before extending along the side. Because you can see, black is left with the so-called 2 stones on the third line, which kind of make that tray shape. Even if black tries to defend his position here, I'm going to lay out a few stones. The shape on the top side is rather flat. This is why we don't generally extend along with the 3/4 stone on the top side before making the enclosure. So you say, well, what if I make my enclosure and then white denies me of the enclosure? Well, black is actually fine with this because black's able to, and furthermore, white will get the flat shape. So, especially for double-digit cues and single-digit cues, it's almost always important to go ahead and enclose the corner before extending. Now, we often talk about the 4/4 stone being fast because the 4/4 stone can block extensions before enclosing the corner. And the reason is when there are 2 directions that one can be approached and 2 directions in one can make an enclosure, and the stone is already high, we can go ahead and forego the corner enclosure for an outright extension. The reason being, if black jumps in incorrectly, he will get attacked. Whereas with the 3/4 stone, when I showed this earlier, black is never going to quite jump in here. It would be a very, very strange move because there's no room under this third line stone in the upper left corner. Black would also be a little foolhardy to go ahead and jump in right away. He would more likely approach from this direction. But what we can see is because black has room on both sides, it becomes less urgent for white to consider a corner enclosure as a priority. Now, of course, white can take a corner enclosure. This would be a fine opening move. And in the same way that the 3/4 enclosure points in the direction of this, white's enclosure points in this direction. So now looking at this board, where should black play next? Many cue players might go ahead and make their extension thinking, okay, I made my corner enclosure in the upper left, I should go ahead and play my extension. But we must also think about the distance. The top side has been played on. Technically, it's been played on almost 4 times, and it has 2 enclosures. Therefore, black would not want to play again. At this point, there's 2 sides that are wide, the right side and the bottom side. So if it's black's turn, black would want to think about playing on either of those sides. If black wants to play on the right side, a calm, single splitting move where he could make a base either to the upper side or he could make a base here on the upper side if pushed in that direction, or of course in that direction. A calm splitting move would negate the direction of the white enclosure in the upper right, or he could also approach in the lower right, because on the bottom side it's unplayed by either player and he's approaching with the backing of his own stone. And if white were to play, say, a calm response, you could see that black has a nice formation on the lower side that also kind of connects to the upper left with only a single more move in that direction. So this is just the very beginnings of thinking about directions, enclosures, and the differences between 4/4 and 3/4 stones. So I'm going to make a whole series about this, and this is just kind of the introductory material. I hope this has cleared some things up, and I look forward to making a few more.